Bobby Jones set his ball on the tee, gave a quick little waggle, and drew his club back with deliberate care before unleashing it in a flash. Did the ball soar down the fairway, rising gracefully over the sand trap to land a simple mashy shot from the 14th green? Absolutely not. A terrible top sent it skittering along the dirt before burying itself firmly in the bunker. There was no gallery to groan in disappointment. The only spectator showed no surprise, and for good reason. This wasn't some American-born golf champion executing the shot, but simply the fourth son of the Vicar of Marchbold, a quiet Welsh seaside town. Bobby let out a decidedly un-vicar-like exclamation. He was a pleasant-looking young man around 28. No one would call him handsome, but his face was friendly and his brown eyes held the steady, loyal warmth of a good dog's. "I'm getting worse by the day," he muttered gloomily. "You're pressing too hard," observed his companion, Dr. Thomas. The middle-aged doctor had grey hair and a cheerfully ruddy face. He never took a full, powerful swing, preferring short, straight shots right down the middle, a strategy that often let him beat more flashy but inconsistent players. Bobby attacked his ball in the bunker with a fierce niblick. On the third try he succeeded, popping it out to lie not far from the green, which Dr. Thomas had reached in 2 respectable iron shots. "Your hole," Bobby conceded. They moved to the next tee. The doctor drove first. A nice straight shot, though without much distance. Bobby sighed, teed his ball, adjusted it, waggled his club endlessly, took the club back stiffly, shut his eyes, lifted his head, dropped his right shoulder, committed every error in the book, and then somehow smashed a beautiful drive straight down the middle. He drew a deep, satisfied breath. The familiar golfer's gloom vanished from his expressive face, replaced by the equally familiar golfer's triumphant joy. "Now I see what I was doing wrong," Bobby declared. A statement with no basis in truth whatsoever. A perfect iron shot, followed by a neat little chip with his mashie, left his ball dead near the pin. He carded a birdie 4, pulling Dr. Thomas back to just 1 up. Swelling with confidence, Bobby marched to the 16th tee. He again did everything wrong, but this time no miracle saved him. A tremendous, magnificent, almost superhuman slice occurred. The ball veered off at a right angle. "If that had been straight." "Whew," remarked Dr. Thomas. "Hell," said Bobby bitterly. Then he paused. "Wait, I thought I heard a shout. I hope my ball didn't hit anyone." He peered to the right. The light was tricky. The sun hung low, blazing directly into their eyes, and a faint mist was creeping in from the sea, making everything hazy. The cliff edge lay a few hundred yards off. "The coastal path runs along there," Bobby noted. "But there's no way my ball carried that far." "Still, I'm sure I heard a cry, did you?" The doctor had heard nothing. Bobby went to hunt for his ball. It took some searching, but he finally found it, practically unplayable, wedged deep in a gorse bush. He took a couple of wild hacks at it, then picked it up and called over that he was conceding the hole. Dr. Thomas walked toward him as the next tee was situated right on the cliff's brink. The 17th was Bobby's personal nightmare. The drive had to carry over a yawning chasm. The actual distance wasn't enormous, but the pull of the sheer drop below was utterly unnerving. They crossed the footpath, which now curved inland to their left, tracing the very edge of the precipice. The doctor took an iron and landed safely, if just barely, on the far side. Bobby took a deep breath and swung. The ball shot forward and disappeared over the lip of the abyss. "Every single blasted time," Bobby muttered, his tone thick with frustration. "I pull the same stupid stunt." He moved carefully along the cliff's edge, looking down. The ocean glittered far below, though not every lost golf ball ended up in the water. The drop was vertical near the top, but grew more gradual further down. Bobby knew one spot where a descent was possible. He'd seen caddies launch themselves over, returning later, breathless and victorious, with a recovered ball. He stopped abruptly, calling out to his friend. "Doctor, over here, take a look at this." About 40 feet down, a shadowy pile resembling discarded clothing lay on a ledge. The doctor inhaled sharply. "Good heavens," he said. "Someone's gone over. We need to get down there." Together they climbed down the rocky face, Bobby, the more agile of the two, assisting his companion. They finally reached the unsettling dark shape. It was a man around 40, unconscious but still breathing. The doctor conducted an examination, checking the man's limbs, his pulse, and his eyes. Kneeling beside him, he finished his assessment and looked up at Bobby, who stood by feeling queasy. The doctor gave a slow, grave shake of his head. "Nothing we can do," he stated. It's over for him. Poor soul, his back is broken. I expect he didn't know the path well, and when the fog rolled in, he just stepped right off. I've told the town council more than once they need a safety rail here." He stood, brushing off his trousers. "I'll go fetch help. Arrange to have the body brought up. It'll be dark soon. Will you stay?" Bobby nodded. "There's really nothing for him. Nothing. It won't be long. His pulse is fading fast. 20 minutes at most. He might regain consciousness before the end, but it's unlikely, still." "Of course," Bobby said quickly. "I'll stay. You go on. If he does wake, there's no medicine or anything." He trailed off. The doctor shook his head. "There will be no pain, none at all." With that, he turned and began a swift climb back up the cliff. Bobby watched until he vanished over the top with a brief wave. Bobby took a couple of steps along the narrow ledge, sat on a rocky outcrop, and lit a cigarette. The incident had rattled him. He'd never been this close to serious injury or death before. What miserable luck life could deal. A sudden bank of mist on a clear evening, one wrong step, and it was all over. The man looked robust, probably hadn't been sick a day in his life. Even the pallor of death couldn't mask a deep, sun-weathered tan. An outdoorsman, perhaps, someone who'd lived abroad. Bobby studied him more intently, the thick, wavy chestnut hair greying at the temples, a prominent nose, a strong jaw, white teeth visible between parted lips, broad shoulders and capable, sinewy hands. The legs were bent at a grotesque angle. Bobby winced and lifted his gaze back to the face. It was a good face, clever, resolute, and resourceful. The eyes, he imagined, were probably blue, and at that exact moment the eyes opened. They were blue, a vivid, deep azure. They fixed directly on Bobby, clear and fully aware, holding a watchful, questioning intensity. Bobby scrambled to his feet and moved toward the man. Before he could reach him, the man spoke. His voice was not faint, but clear and resonant. "Why didn't they ask Evans?" he said. Then a slight tremor passed through him, his eyelids closed, and his jaw went slack. The man was dead. Why didn't they ask Evans? Chapter 2. Concerning Fathers. Bobby knelt beside him again, but there was no question. The man was gone. A final flash of awareness, that abrupt, puzzling question, and then the end. With a quiet sense of apology, Bobby reached into the dead man's coat pocket and retrieved a silk handkerchief, which he carefully laid over the still face. There was nothing else he could do. As he did so, something else slipped from the pocket. A photograph. Before tucking it back, his eyes fell on the image. It showed a woman, fair and young, with wide, arresting eyes. Her face held a haunting quality, the kind that lingers in memory long after you look away. It wasn't just beauty, it was something deeper, something unforgettable. Gently, he returned the picture to its place and settled back to wait. Time dragged on unbearably. Then it struck him. He'd promised his father he'd play the organ for the 6 o'clock evening service, and it was already 10 minutes to. Of course, the circumstances would explain his absence, but he wished he'd thought to send word with the doctor. Reverend Thomas Jones was a worrier by nature, the kind of man whose anxiety churned his stomach into knots. Bobby loved the old man, even if he privately thought him a hopeless fooser. The Reverend, in turn, saw his son as a well-meaning but scatterbrained young fool, and he had far less patience for Bobby's casual attitude than Bobby had for his father's fretting. Poor old governor, Bobby mused. He'll be pacing the vestry by now, wondering whether to start without me. He'll work himself into a state, get that awful stomach pain, and then skip supper entirely. He never seems to grasp that. I wouldn't miss it unless it was absolutely necessary. But then, what does it really matter? People over 50 are like that, I suppose. They tie themselves in knots over trifles. Can't help it. Raised all wrong. Honestly, the man has less sense than a startled hen. He sat there, torn between affection and irritation, reflecting on how life at home often felt like one long concession to his father's peculiarities. Mr. Jones, of course, saw it the opposite way as his own endless sacrifice, utterly lost on the younger generation. Funny how two people could see the same life so differently. Where was that doctor? Surely he should have returned by now. Bobby stood and stamped his feet restlessly. Just then he heard movement above and looked up, hoping for help, but it wasn't the doctor. A stranger in +4s stood at the top of the slope. "Hello there," the man called down, his voice a pleasant tenor. "Has there been an accident? Can I be of any help?" In the fading light, Bobby could only make out a tall figure. He explained the situation briefly, and the stranger expressed his shock. "Is there nothing I can do?" "Fetch someone." Bobby told him help was already on the way and asked if he saw any sign of it. "Not yet," the man replied. "Thing is," Bobby admitted, "I'm supposed to be somewhere by 6. "And you don't feel right leaving?" "Not really," Bobby said. "I mean, the poor fellow's gone, and there's nothing to be done," but still he trailed off, struggling as usual to put his muddled feelings into words. The stranger seemed to understand. "I know how it is," he said. "Tell you what, if I can find my way down, I'll stay until the others get here." "Would you?" Bobby said, relieved. "It's my father, you see. He's a decent sort, but he gets so upset over things. Can you manage the climb? Just a little to the left, now to the right, that's perfect." "It's not so hard, really." He guided the other man with steady instructions until they stood facing each other on the narrow ledge. The stranger appeared to be around 35, with a somewhat vague expression that seemed to call for a monocle and a thin moustache. "I'm not from around here," he offered. "The name's Bassington French. I've come down to look at a property. What a dreadful thing to have happened." Did he simply walk over the edge? Bobby gave a quick nod. "A patch of mist rolled in," he explained. "It's a treacherous spot on the path." "Well, I must be off. Thanks for your help. It was awfully decent of you." "Not at all," the other man replied. "Anyone would have done the same. You can't just leave a poor fellow lying there. It wouldn't be right, would it?" Bobby was already scrambling up the steep path. At the top, he gave a brief wave before breaking into a brisk run across the fields. To save precious minutes, he vaulted over the churchyard wall instead of going around to the gate, a move spotted by the vicar from the vestry window, who shook his head in stern disapproval. It was 6:05, but the bell continued its slow, mournful toll. Any explanations or scoldings would have to wait until after the service. Out of breath, Bobby slid into his seat and fumbled with the stops of the old organ. Almost without thinking, his fingers drifted into the solemn notes of Chopin's funeral march. Later, with an air of profound disappointment rather than anger, as he made a point of stating, the vicar took his son to task. "If you cannot undertake a responsibility properly, my dear Bobby," he said, "it is better not to undertake it at all. I am aware that you and your friends seem to regard punctuality as optional, but there is one whom we should not keep waiting. You volunteered to play the organ of your own free will. I did not force you. Yet, at the first sign of difficulty, you chose instead to go off amusing yourself." Bobby decided it was best to cut in before his father built up too much steam. "Sorry, Dad," he said, his tone as cheerful and breezy as ever, no matter the subject. "Wasn't my fault this time I was standing watch over a body." "You were what?" "Keeping an eye on a fellow who went over the cliff. You know the spot near the chasm by the 17th tee. A bit of mist came down just then, and he must have walked straight off." "Good heavens," the vicar exclaimed. "What a terrible accident. Was the man killed instantly?" "No, he was unconscious. He died just after Dr. Thomas had left. But of course I felt I had to stay, couldn't just walk away and leave him. Then another chap came along, so I handed over the duty of chief mourner and raced here as fast as I could." The vicar sighed deeply. "Oh, Bobby," he said, "will nothing ever touch your unfortunate indifference? It grieves me more than I can express. Here you have come face to face with death, sudden death, and you can make light of it. It leaves you entirely unaffected. Everything, no matter how solemn, no matter how sacred, is just a joke to your generation." Bobby shifted his feet uncomfortably. If his father couldn't see that, sometimes you joked about a thing precisely because it had shaken you. Well, he simply couldn't see it. It wasn't the sort of feeling you could put into words. When death and tragedy were close, you kept a stiff upper lip. But what could you expect? Nobody over 50 seemed to understand anything anymore. They had the most peculiar notions. Probably the war, Bobby thought loyally. It unsettled them, and they never quite recovered. He felt a pang of embarrassment for his father, mixed with pity. "Sorry, Dad," he said again, with the clear-eyed understanding that any real explanation was hopeless. The vicar, for his part, felt sorry for his son. He looked properly chastened, but also ashamed of him. The boy had no grasp of life's gravity. Even his apology was bright and utterly unrepentant. They walked toward the vicarage, each silently struggling to make allowances for the other. The vicar wondered, when will Bobby find some proper occupation? Bobby, meanwhile, was thinking, how much longer can I stand it down here? Yet they were both extremely fond of each other. Bobby missed the immediate aftermath of his discovery. The next morning he travelled into the city to meet a friend considering opening a garage, who believed Bobby's partnership could be useful. Once everything was settled satisfactorily, Bobby headed home 2 days later, just barely catching the 11:30 train. He arrived at Paddington Station at 11:28, sprinted down the subway, and burst onto platform 3 as the train began to pull away. He flung himself at the nearest carriage door, ignoring the shouts of ticket collectors and porters behind him. Wrenching the door open, he tumbled inside, landing on his hands and knees before scrambling to his feet. An agile porter slammed the door shut, and Bobby found himself facing the compartment's only other passenger. It was a first-class carriage. In the corner facing the engine sat a dark-haired girl smoking a cigarette. She wore a red skirt, a short green jacket, and a vivid blue beret. Despite a faint, almost comical resemblance to a street performer's monkey with her long, sorrowful dark eyes and a puckered expression, she was undeniably striking. Bobby started to apologize, then stopped short. "Why, it's you, Frankie," he exclaimed. "Haven't seen you in ages." "Well, I haven't seen you either. Sit down and talk." Bobby grinned. "My ticket's the wrong color for this carriage?" "That doesn't matter," Frankie said kindly. "I'll pay the difference for you." "My masculine pride rebels at the thought," Bobby replied. "How could I possibly let a lady pay my way?" "It seems to be one of the few things we're still permitted to do these days," Frankie remarked dryly. "I shall pay the difference myself," Bobby declared with mock heroism, just as a burly figure in blue appeared at the corridor door. "Leave it to me," Frankie said. She offered the ticket collector a gracious smile. He touched his hat as he took the white cardboard ticket from her and punched it. "Mr. Jones has just popped in to chat for a moment," she explained. "That's all right, isn't it?" "Perfectly all right, your ladyship." "I expect the gentleman won't be staying too long," he replied, coughing tactfully. "I won't be making my rounds again until after Bristol," he added, with a meaningful nod before moving on. "The power of a smile," Bobby observed as the official withdrew. Lady Frances Derwent shook her head thoughtfully. "I'm not entirely convinced it's the smile. I rather think it's father's habit of tipping everyone 5 shillings whenever he travels that does the trick." "I thought you'd sworn off Wales for good, Frankie." Frances sighed. "You know how it is, Bobby? You know how impossible parents can be between that and the bathrooms being in a dreadful state, and having absolutely nothing to do and no one to see. Honestly, people simply refuse to visit the countryside anymore. They claim they're economizing and can't travel so far. Well, what's a girl supposed to do?" Bobby shook his head, sympathetically acknowledging the dilemma. "Besides," Frankie continued, "after the party I endured last night, I decided even home couldn't be worse." "What was wrong with the party?" "Nothing, and that was precisely the problem. It was like every other party, only more painfully so. It was supposed to start at the Savoy at 8:30. A few of us drifted in around 9:15 and naturally got tangled up with other groups, but we finally sorted ourselves out by 10. We had dinner. Then, after a while, we moved on to the Marionette. There was a rumor it was going to be raided, but nothing happened. The place was utterly lifeless. We had a few drinks, then went to the Bull Ring, which was even deader. After that came a coffee stall, then a fried fish shop, and then we got the bright idea to show up at Angela's uncle's for breakfast to see if we could shock him. He wasn't shocked, just profoundly bored. Eventually, we all just fizzled out and went home. Honestly, Bobby, it's just not good enough." "I suppose not," Bobby agreed, quietly suppressing a twinge of envy for even that glimpse of glamour. Bobby had never imagined, even in his most fanciful daydreams, that he might one day belong to the exclusive circles of the Marionette Club or the Bull Ring. His connection with Frankie was an unusual one. As boys, he and his brothers had often played with the children from the castle estate. Now that they were all adults, their paths rarely crossed. On the few occasions they did meet, they still addressed each other by their first names. Whenever Frankie was in town, Bobby and his brothers might be invited for a game of tennis. Yet Frankie and her brothers never received an invitation to the vicarage. It was an unspoken understanding that such a visit would be awkward for everyone. Tennis parties, however, always needed extra players. Despite the casual use of first names, a faint tension lingered. The Derwent family sometimes seemed overly friendly, as if to prove that social distinctions meant nothing to them. Meanwhile, the Jones family maintained a polite formality, careful not to presume a closeness that wasn't genuinely offered. The two families now shared little beyond a handful of childhood recollections. Still, Bobby was genuinely fond of Frankie and always felt a spark of pleasure on those rare instances when chance brought them together. "I'm just so exhausted by everything," Frankie sighed, her voice heavy with weariness. "Aren't you?" Bobby thought for a moment. "No, I don't believe I am, my dear." "How absolutely marvelous," Frankie replied, a hint of genuine surprise in her tone. Now, I don't mean I'm some sort of obnoxiously cheerful person, Bobby clarified, worried he might give the wrong impression. I can't stand people who are aggressively hearty either. Frankie gave a delicate shudder at the very idea. I know exactly what you mean, she murmured. They're utterly dreadful. They shared a look of mutual understanding. It was a comfortable silence, the kind only old acquaintances can share. Speaking of dreadful things, Frankie said abruptly, changing the subject. What's this I read about a man going over the cliffs? Dr. Thomas and I were the ones who found him, Bobby confirmed. How did you hear about it, Frankie? I saw a small piece in the newspaper. Look here. She pointed to a brief article titled, Fatal Accident in Sea Mist. The report stated that the victim at Marchbold had been identified late the previous night using a photograph found on his person. The picture was of a Mrs. Leo Cayman, contacted by authorities. Mrs. Cayman had travelled immediately to Marchbold and identified the deceased as her brother, Alex Pritchard. Mr. Pritchard had recently returned from a decade abroad in Siam and was just beginning a walking tour. The inquest was scheduled for the following day. Bobby's mind instantly returned to the haunting, memorable face in that photograph. I think I'll have to give evidence at the inquest, he said. How thrilling. I shall definitely come and listen, Frankie declared. I doubt there will be anything thrilling about it, Bobby countered. We simply found him, that's all. Was he already gone? Not at first, he died about 15 minutes later. I was alone with him when it happened. He paused, the memory vivid and sobering. Rather grim, Frankie said softly, displaying an intuitive understanding that Bobby's own father had noticeably lacked. Of course, he wouldn't have felt anything by then. No. But all the same, well, you see, he looked like such a vibrant person. It's a rotten way to end, isn't it? Just stepping off a cliff in a pointless little patch of fog. I get you, Steve, Frankie said, and once again that odd, familiar phrase conveyed perfect sympathy. Did you ever meet the sister? She asked after a moment. No. I've been in London for a couple of days. I had to meet a friend of mine to discuss a garage business we're planning to start. You remember him, Badger Beedon. Do I? Of course you do. You must remember good old Badger. He has a bit of a squint. Frankie frowned in concentration. He's got this terribly silly laugh, goes something like, haw, 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 Bobby added helpfully. Frankie's brow remained furrowed. He fell off his pony when we were kids, Bobby continued, painting the picture. Got stuck head first in a mud puddle, and we had to pull him out by his boots. Oh, Frankie exclaimed, a wave of recognition washing over her. Now I remember. He used to stammer terribly. He still does, Bobby said, almost proudly. Didn't he try to run a chicken farm that went completely bust? Frankie inquired, the full memory finally returning. That's correct. Frankie nodded. And after that he worked in a stockbroker's office, and they let him go within a month? Exactly. Then they shipped him off to Australia, and he returned. Yes. Bobby, Frankie said, leaning forward. Please tell me you're not investing any money in this scheme of his. I don't have any money to invest, Bobby replied. That's a relief, Frankie sighed. Of course, Bobby continued. Badger has been trying to find someone with a bit of capital to put in. It's surprisingly difficult, you know. Frankie gazed out the window. When you observe the world, you'd think people had no common sense whatsoever. Yet somehow they managed to possess just enough to avoid these particular pitfalls. The implication of her words finally dawned on Bobby. Now listen, Frankie, he said, his tone defensive. Badger is a top-notch fellow, absolutely solid. They always are, Frankie remarked dryly. Who are? The ones who get shipped to Australia and come back. How did he fund this business venture, anyway? An aunt passed away and left him a garage with space for 6 cars and a 3-room apartment above it. His family chipped in £100 to buy some used cars. You'd be amazed at the deals you can find on second-hand automobiles. I bought one once, Frankie said with a wince. It's a sore subject. Let's not discuss it. Why did you leave the Navy? They didn't discharge you, did they? Not at your age. Bobby fell silent for a moment. My eyes, he said roughly. You always had issues with your eyes, I recall. I know. I barely passed the vision requirements. Then came foreign service, the intense glare. You understand it really did them in. So, well, I had no choice but to resign. Grim, Frankie murmured, turning her gaze back to the passing scenery. A heavy pause lingered between them. It's still unfair, Bobby burst out suddenly. My eyes aren't that bad. They've stabilized according to the doctors. I could have carried on perfectly well. They look perfectly fine to me, Frankie said, meeting his earnest brown gaze directly. So you see, Bobby concluded, I'm going into business with Badger. Frankie gave a slow nod, just as an attendant opened their compartment door to announce first luncheon call. Shall we? Frankie suggested. They made their way to the dining car. Bobby made a brief strategic exit when the ticket collector was likely to appear. No need to put his conscience through too much strain, he explained upon returning. Frankie remarked that she doubted ticket collectors had consciences to begin with. It was just past 5 in the evening when they arrived at Silem, the station for Marchbolt. The car is meeting me, said Frankie. I'll give you a lift. Thanks. That'll spare me hauling this dreadful thing for 2 miles. He gave his suitcase a dismissive kick. 3 miles, not 2, Frankie corrected. It's 2 if you take the footpath across the golf links. The one where that man went over the cliff. I suppose nobody gave him a helpful shove, did they? Frankie asked idly as she handed her dressing case to her maid. Pushed him? Good heavens, no. Why on earth would you think that? Well, it would make the whole affair far more interesting, wouldn't it? Frankie said with a casual shrug. Chapter 4. The Inquest. The inquest into the death of Alex Pritchard was held the following day. Dr. Thomas provided testimony regarding the discovery of the body. Life was not yet extinct at that time, inquired the coroner. No, the deceased was still breathing. However, there was no possibility of recovery. The injuries consisted of, here the doctor launched into highly technical medical terminology. The coroner intervened for the jury's benefit. In plain, everyday terms, the man's back was broken. If you wish to phrase it that way, Dr. Thomas conceded with a somber nod. He described how he had gone to fetch assistance, leaving the dying man in Bobby's care. Regarding the cause of this tragedy, what is your opinion, Dr. Thomas? I should say that in all probability, barring any evidence concerning his state of mind, the deceased stepped off the edge of the cliff inadvertently. A mist was rising from the sea, and at that specific point, the path turns sharply inland. Due to the mist, the deceased may have failed to perceive the danger and continued walking straight ahead, in which case 2 steps would have carried him over the edge. Were there any indications of a struggle or assault? The possibility of an outside party being involved was raised. I can only confirm that every injury is consistent with a fall from the rocks 50 or 60 feet below, the doctor stated. The issue of suicide remains, then? That is certainly a possibility. Whether the man stepped off the edge accidentally or intentionally is something I cannot determine. Robert Jones was the next to testify. Bobby described playing golf with the doctor, explaining how he had sliced a shot toward the sea. A thickening mist had made visibility poor. He believed he heard a shout, briefly wondering if his errant ball could have struck someone on the coastal path below. He quickly dismissed the idea, certain the ball couldn't have carried that far. Did you retrieve the ball? Yes, it lay roughly 100 yards short of the footpath. He began to recount how they had proceeded to the next tee and his own shocking discovery of the body in the chasm. But the coroner interrupted, as this would merely duplicate the doctor's account. The coroner focused intently, instead, on the cry Bobby mentioned. It was just a shout, a cry for help? No, nothing like that. More of an exclamation, really. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure I heard anything at all. A cry of surprise, perhaps? That's closer, Bobby agreed, relieved. The sort of sound a man might make if a golf ball struck him out of nowhere. Or if he unexpectedly stepped into open air, believing he was on solid ground. Exactly. After confirming the man had died approximately 5 minutes after the doctor departed for assistance, Bobby's testimony concluded. The coroner, by now, was eager to wrap up what seemed a clear-cut case. Mrs. Leo Kamen was summoned. Bobby couldn't hide a sharp pang of disappointment. Where was the face from the photograph that had fallen from the dead man's pocket? Photographers, he thought with a surge of disgust, were the worst kind of liars. The portrait must have been taken years ago, but even allowing for that, it was difficult to reconcile that charming, wide-eyed girl with this hard-faced woman before him, with her plucked eyebrows and unmistakably dyed hair. Time, Bobby realized with a sudden chill, was a terrifying force. What, for instance, would Frankie look like in 20 years? He suppressed a slight shiver. Meanwhile, Amelia Kamen of 17 St. Leonard's Gardens, Paddington, was giving her evidence. The deceased was her only brother, Alexander Pritchard. She had last seen him the day before the tragedy when he announced his plans for a walking tour in Wales. He had recently returned from abroad. Did he seem in a normal, contented state of mind? Oh, absolutely. Alex was always cheerful. As far as you knew, he had no particular worries. I'm sure he didn't. He was looking forward to the trip immensely. Were there any financial difficulties or other troubles in his life recently? Well, I really couldn't say for certain, Mrs. Kamen admitted. You see, he'd only just come back, and before that I hadn't laid eyes on him for 10 years. He wasn't much of a letter writer. But he took me out to the theatre and for nice lunches in London, and he gave me a few gifts, so I don't believe he was short of funds. His spirits were so high, I can't imagine anything else was wrong. What was your brother's profession, Mrs. Kamen? The lady seemed momentarily flustered. Well, I can't say I precisely know. He called it prospecting. He was very seldom in England. Do you know of any reason why he would take his own life? Oh no, and I simply can't believe he would do such a thing. It must have been a dreadful accident. How do you account for your brother having no luggage with him, not even a knapsack? He disliked carrying one. His plan was to post parcels to himself every other day. He mailed one the day before he left containing his nightclothes and a pair of socks, but he addressed it to Derbyshire by mistake instead of Denbighshire. It only arrived here today. That settled a rather odd detail. Mrs. Kamen continued, explaining she had been contacted by the photographers whose name was on the picture her brother carried. She and her husband had travelled to Marchbolt, where she immediately identified the body. As she finished speaking, her voice broke, and she began to weep. The coroner offered a few comforting words before excusing her. He then turned to the jury. Their duty was to determine how the man died. Thankfully, the situation seemed straightforward. There was no indication Mr. Pritchard had been troubled, despondent, or in a state of mind that might lead to suicide. Quite the opposite. He had been in good health and high spirits, eagerly anticipating his vacation. It was, unfortunately, a known fact that when the sea mist rolled in, the cliffside path became treacherous. Perhaps they would agree it was high time something was done about it. The jury returned a swift verdict. We find the deceased died by misadventure, and we wish to add that, in our opinion, the town council should promptly install a fence or railing on the seaward side of the path where it passes the chasm. The coroner nodded in agreement. The inquest was concluded. Returning to the vicarage about 30 minutes later, Bobby discovered his involvement in Alex Pritchard's death wasn't entirely over. He was told Mr. and Mrs. Kamen had come to see him and were in the study with his father. Bobby headed there, finding his father valiantly, though not very enthusiastically, keeping up polite conversation. "Ah," his father said with a hint of relief. "Here's Bobby." Mr. Kamen stood and approached the young man with an outstretched hand. He was a large, ruddy man with a forcefully hearty demeanour, though his eyes were cold and somewhat shifty, betraying the act. As for Mrs. Kamen, while one might call her attractive in a brash, unrefined way, she bore little resemblance now to that old photograph of herself, and not a trace of that wistful expression remained. Bobby thought to himself that if she hadn't recognized her own picture, it was unlikely anyone else would have. "I came down with the wife," said Mr. Kamen, seizing Bobby's hand in a firm, uncomfortable grip. "Had to stand by, you know. Amelia's naturally upset." Mrs. Kamen sniffled. "We came round to see you," Mr. Kamen went on. "You see, my poor wife's brother died, practically speaking, in your arms. Naturally, she wanted to hear everything you could tell her about his last moments." "Absolutely," said Bobby, feeling awkward. "Oh, absolutely." He gave a nervous grin and immediately caught his father's sigh, a sigh of profound Christian resignation. "Poor Alex," said Mrs. Kamen, dabbing at her eyes. Poor Alex?" "I know," said Bobby, absolutely grim. He shifted uncomfortably. "You see," Mrs. Kamen said, looking at Bobby with hopeful expectation. "If he left any last words or messages, naturally I'd want to know." "Oh, of course," said Bobby. "But as a matter of fact, he didn't. Nothing at all?" Mrs. Kamen looked both disappointed and skeptical. Bobby felt apologetic. "No, well, truly nothing at all. It was for the best," Mr. Kamen stated solemnly. "To pass away unconscious without pain, why, you must think of it as a mercy, Amelia." "I suppose I must," Mrs. Kamen conceded. "You're sure he felt no pain?" "I'm certain he didn't," Bobby assured her. Mrs. Kamen let out a deep sigh. "Well, that's something to be thankful for. I did hope he might have left a final message, but I can see it's best as it is. Poor Alex. He was such a vigorous, outdoorsy man." "Yes, wasn't he?" said Bobby. He remembered the tanned face, the deep blue eyes. Alex Pritchard had possessed an appealing personality, compelling even near death. It was strange that he was the brother of Mrs. Kamen and the brother-in-law of Mr. Kamen. Bobby felt he had deserved better connections. "Well, we're truly grateful for your help," Mrs. Kamen said. "Oh, it was nothing," Bobby replied. "I couldn't have just stood by. He stumbled over his words, feeling awkward. "We won't forget your kindness, Mr. Kamen added, giving Bobby another of those painfully firm handshakes. Mrs. Kamen offered a limp hand in return. After a few more farewells from his father, Bobby walked the couple to the front door. "So what keeps you busy, young man?" Kamen inquired. "On leave from something, are you?" "Mostly searching for work, actually," Bobby admitted. He hesitated. "I served in the Navy." "Tough times these days, very tough," Mr. Kamen remarked, shaking his head. "Well, I certainly wish you the best of luck." "Thank you," Bobby said politely. He watched them make their way down the overgrown driveway and stood there lost in thought. A jumble of images rushed through his mind, the photograph, that girl's face with its wide-set eyes and soft hazy hair, and then the Mrs. Kamen of today, caked in heavy makeup, her plucked eyebrows framing eyes now buried in folds of flesh until they resembled a pig's, her hair a violent shade of henna red. Every trace of youthful innocence had vanished. What a shame, he thought. It all probably came from marrying a loud, boorish man like Mr. Kamen. Had she chosen someone else, she might have aged with grace, a touch of silver in her hair, those same wide eyes still clear in a smooth, pale face. But then again, maybe not. Bobby sighed and shook his head. "That's the real tragedy of marriage," he muttered gloomily. "What did you say?" Bobby snapped out of his reverie to find Frankie standing beside him, her approach unnoticed. "Hello," he said. "Hello yourself. Why marriage? And whose marriage are we condemning?" "Just a general observation," Bobby explained. "Which is, on the utterly devastating effects marriage can have." "Who's been devastated?" Bobby outlined his thoughts, but found Frankie entirely unsympathetic. "Don't be silly. The woman looks exactly like her photograph. When did you see it? Were you even at the inquest?" "Of course I was at the inquest. What else is there to do around here? An inquest is a blessed event. I'd never been to one before. I was absolutely riveted. Granted, it would have been better if it were a mysterious poisoning with lab reports and all that drama, but one mustn't be too picky when simple pleasures come along. I held out hope until the very end for a hint of foul play, but it all turned out disappointingly straightforward. What bloodthirsty tendencies you have, Frankie. I know. Probably atavism, or however you pronounce that. I've never been sure, don't you think? I'm certain I'm atavistic. My nickname in school was Monkey Face, after all. Do monkeys have a particular fondness for murder? Bobby asked. You sound like one of those letters to the editor in a Sunday paper, Frankie retorted. Our readers' opinions on this topic are warmly invited.
You know, Bobby said, circling back, I don't agree with you about Mrs. Kamen. Her photograph was beautiful. Airbrushed. That's all. Frankie cut in. Well, it was touched up so much you wouldn't recognize them as the same person. You're being blind, Frankie insisted. The photographer did everything possible, but it was still a nasty piece of work. I completely disagree, Bobby said coldly. Anyway, where did you see it? In the local Evening Echo.
It probably didn't reproduce well. You're absolutely batty, Frankie said crossly. Over a painted, worn-out, yes, I said it, bitch like the Cayman woman. Frankie, Bobby chided, I'm shocked, and here on the Vicarage Drive, practically holy ground. Well, you shouldn't be so ridiculous. There was a pause, and then Frankie's sudden irritation faded. What's really ridiculous, she said, is us quarrelling about that wretched woman. I came to suggest a round of golf. How about it? You're on, Chief, Bobby replied happily. They walked along together in a friendly way, talking about slicing the ball, pulling a shot, and how to land the perfect chip onto the green. The recent sad event had completely slipped their minds until Bobby, sinking a long putt on the 11th to tie the hole, suddenly let out a sound. What is it? Frankie asked. Nothing. I just remembered something. What? Well, those people, the Caymans, they came by and asked if the man had said anything before he died, and I told them he hadn't. And now I just remembered that he actually did. Not exactly your sharpest morning, then. Well, you see, it wasn't the sort of thing they were looking for. I suppose that's why it didn't stick in my mind. What did he say? Frankie inquired, her curiosity piqued. He said, why didn't they ask Evans? What a strange thing to say. Nothing else? No. He just opened his eyes, said that quite suddenly, and then died, poor fellow. Oh, well, said Frankie, turning the phrase over in her thoughts. I don't think you need to worry. It couldn't have been important. No, of course not. Still, I wish I'd mentioned it. You see, I told them he'd said nothing at all. Well, it amounts to the same thing, Frankie replied. I mean, it's not like he said, "Tell Susan I always loved her," or "The will is in the oak desk," or any of the proper dramatic last words you read in novels. You don't think it's worth writing to them about it? I wouldn't bother. It couldn't possibly matter. I expect you're right, Bobby said, and turned his attention back to the game with renewed energy. But the matter didn't really leave his mind. It was a small point, yet it nagged at him. He felt a faint, persistent discomfort about it. Frankie's viewpoint was, he felt certain, the right and sensible one. The thing was unimportant. Let it go. But his conscience kept pricking him. He had stated the dead man said nothing. That wasn't true. It was all very trivial and silly, yet he couldn't feel entirely easy about it. Finally, that evening, on an impulse, he sat down and wrote to Mr. Cayman. Dear Mr. Cayman, I have just remembered that your brother-in-law did speak a few words before he died. I believe the exact phrase was, "Why didn't they ask Evans?" I apologize for not mentioning this earlier, but I attached no significance to the words at the time, and I suppose they simply slipped my memory. Sincerely, Robert Jones. 2 days later, he received a reply. Dear Mr. Jones, your letter of the 6th is to hand. Thank you for so punctiliously repeating my poor brother-in-law's last words, despite their trivial nature. What my wife had hoped was that her brother might have left her some final message. Nevertheless, thank you for being so conscientious. Yours faithfully, Leo Cayman. Bobby felt thoroughly snubbed. Why didn't they ask Evans? Chapter 6. End of a picnic. The following day, Bobby received a letter of an entirely different sort. It's all set, old boy, wrote Badger in a nearly illegible scrawl that did no credit to the expensive private school that had educated him. Actually got 5 cars yesterday for £15 the lot, an Austin, 2 Morrises, and a couple of Rovers. Right now they don't exactly run, but I think we can tinker with them enough. Come on, a car's a car after all. So long as it gets the buyer home without falling apart, that's all they can expect. I'm planning to open up Monday week, and I'm counting on you. So don't let me down, will you, old boy? I must say old Aunt Carrie was a real sport. I once broke the window of a grumpy neighbor of hers who'd complained about her cats, and she never forgot it. Sent me $20 every Christmas, and now this. We're bound to succeed. The thing's a sure bet. I mean, a car's a car after all. You can pick them up for nothing. Give it a fresh coat of paint and that's all the average person notices. The thing will go with a bang. Now, don't forget. Monday week. I'm relying on you. Yours ever, Badger. Bobby told his father he would be heading into the city the following Monday to start a new position. The details of the job failed to spark any enthusiasm in the vicar, who, it should be noted, had crossed paths with Badger Beedon before. Instead, he launched into a lengthy sermon about the importance of avoiding any personal liabilities. Though not an expert in financial affairs, his advice was clear in its intent, if vague in its technicalities. That Wednesday, another letter arrived for Bobby, addressed in a slanted foreign script. Its contents left the young man thoroughly astonished. It came from the firm of Henriquez and Dallo in Buenos Aires, and in short offered him a position with a salary of £1,000 a year. For a moment, Bobby was convinced he must be dreaming. £1,000 a year. He read the letter again, more carefully this time. It mentioned a preference for someone with naval experience, hinted that Bobby's name had been suggested by an unnamed party, required immediate acceptance, and stated he must be ready to depart for Buenos Aires within a week. Well, I'll be damned, Bobby exclaimed, unfortunately forgetting his father's presence. Bobby, sorry, Dad, didn't realize you were still here. Mr. Jones cleared his throat, preparing to launch into what Bobby knew would be a lengthy discourse. Determined to avoid it, Bobby cut him off with a simple declaration. Someone's just offered me £1,000 a year. The vicar's mouth fell open, rendering him temporarily speechless. That stopped his lecture in its tracks, Bobby thought with some satisfaction. My dear boy, did I hear you correctly? Someone has offered you £1,000 a year. 1,000? Hit the nail on the head, Dad, said Bobby. It's impossible, the vicar stated flatly. Bobby wasn't offended by this blunt disbelief. His own estimation of his financial worth wasn't much higher. They must be complete fools, he agreed cheerfully. Who, precisely, are these people? Bobby handed him the letter. The vicar fumbled for his pince nez and peered at it suspiciously before reading it through twice. Most extraordinary, he said at last. Most extraordinary. Lunatics, Bobby offered. Ah, my boy, the vicar said, his tone swelling with paternal pride. It is, after all, a great thing to be an Englishman honesty. That is what we represent. The Royal Navy has carried that ideal across the globe, an Englishman's word. This South American firm recognizes the value of a young man whose integrity is unshakable and whose loyalty is assured. You can always depend on an Englishman to play the game. And keep a straight bat, Bobby added. The vicar looked at his son doubtfully. The phrase, an excellent one, had indeed been on the tip of his tongue, but something in Bobby's tone struck him as not entirely sincere. The young man, however, maintained a perfectly serious expression. All the same, Dad, he said. Why me? What do you mean, why you? There are plenty of Englishmen in England, Bobby pointed out. Hearty fellows, brimming with cricketing spirit. Why single me out? Your former commanding officer may have recommended you. Yes, I suppose that's possible, Bobby said, though he sounded uncertain. It doesn't really matter anyway, since I can't take the job. Can't take it, my dear boy? What are you saying? Well, I'm already committed, you see, to Badger. Badger beat on. Nonsense, Bobby, this is a serious opportunity. It is a bit of a tough break, I admit, Bobby said with a sigh, his mind briefly wandering to the chaotic, chicken-filled mornings of Badger's ill-fated farming venture. But any informal arrangement you've made with young Beadon cannot possibly compare, his father insisted. It matters to me. Young Beadon is entirely unreliable. I understand he has already been a considerable source of trouble and expense to his family. He hasn't had much luck. Badger is far too trusting for his own good. Luck, I'd say. That young man has never done a proper day's work in his life. That's not true, Dad. Why, he used to get up at 5 a.m. to tend to those wretched chickens. It wasn't his fault the children all caught that nasty cough or whatever it was. I have never approved of this garage scheme. Pure foolishness. You must abandon it. I can't, sir. I gave my word. I can't disappoint old Badger. He's relying on me. The argument continued. The vicar, coloured by his low opinion of Badger, could not see any promise made to that young man as valid. He viewed Bobby as stubborn and intent on leading a shiftless life alongside a thoroughly bad influence. Bobby, for his part, doggedly repeated the same unoriginal line. He couldn't let old Badger down. The vicar eventually stormed out, and Bobby immediately sat down to write to Henriquez and Dallow, turning down their offer. He sighed as he sealed the letter. He was passing up an opportunity that would never come his way again, yet he saw no other choice. Later, on the golf course, he laid out the dilemma for Frankie. She listened carefully. You would have had to go to South America? Yes. Would you have wanted that? Yes, why not? Frankie let out a breath. Well, she said firmly, I believe you did the right thing. About Badger, you mean? Yes, I couldn't desert the old chap, could I? No, but be careful the old chap, as you call him, doesn't desert you first. Oh, I'll be cautious. Besides, I'll be fine. I don't have any assets to speak of. That must be rather amusing, Frankie remarked. Why? I'm not sure. It just sounds rather lovely and free and unburdened, I suppose. When I think about it, I don't have many real assets either. Father provides an allowance, and I have plenty of houses to stay in, and clothes and maids, and some dreadful family jewels, and ample credit at the shops. But that's all the family's, really. It isn't me. No, but even so, Bobby stopped. Oh, it's completely different, I know. Yes, said Bobby. It's completely different. A wave of gloom settled over him. They walked quietly to the next tee. I'm going to town tomorrow, Frankie announced, as Bobby positioned his ball. Tomorrow? Oh, and I was going to ask if you'd like to go for a picnic. I would have. But it's all arranged. You see, Father has the gout again. You should stay and nurse him, said Bobby. He hates being nursed. It irritates him terribly. He prefers the second footman. The man is sympathetic and doesn't mind having things hurled at him while being called a blithering idiot. Bobby topped his drive, and the ball rolled pathetically into the bunker. Hard luck, said Frankie, and then drove a lovely straight shot that sailed right over it. By the way, she mentioned, we might arrange to do something in London. You'll be up soon? On Monday, but, well, it's pointless, isn't it? What do you mean, pointless? Well, I mean, I'll be working as a mechanic most of the time. I mean, even so, said Frankie, I suppose you're just as capable of coming to a cocktail party and having one too many as any of my other acquaintances. Bobby just shook his head. I'll host a beer and sausage party if you'd prefer, Frankie offered encouragingly. Oh, come on, Frankie, what's the use? You can't mix your circles. Your crowd is a different world from mine. I assure you, said Frankie, my crowd is a very varied assortment. You're pretending not to understand. You can bring Badger if you like. Now, that's true friendship. You have some sort of bias against Badger. Perhaps it's his stammer. People who stammer always make me start to stammer too. Look here, Frankie, it's no good and you know it. It's fine down here, there's not much to do, and I suppose I'm better than nothing. You're always terribly decent to me, and I appreciate it. But I know I'm just nobody, I mean, when you've quite finished airing your inferiority complex. Frankie said coolly, perhaps you'll try getting out of the bunker with a niblick instead of a putter. Have I? Oh, blast! He put the putter back in his bag and took out the niblick. Frankie watched with a malicious sense of satisfaction as he hacked at the golf ball 5 times in a row, sending clouds of sand into the air around them. Your hole, Bobby said, retrieving the ball. I suppose it is, Frankie replied coolly, and that gives me the match. Shall we play the extra hole? No, I don't think so. I have a great deal to do today, of course. I imagine you do. They walked back to the clubhouse in a heavy, shared silence. Well, Frankie said, extending her hand. Goodbye, my dear. It's been absolutely marvellous having you around to entertain me while I've been staying here. Perhaps I'll see you again sometime when I find myself with nothing better to do. Listen, Frankie, maybe you'll even stoop to attending my little costume party. I hear you can find pearl buttons for a song at Woolworth's. Frankie. His protest was swallowed by the roar of the Bentley's engine as Frankie started it up. She drove off with nothing more than a careless wave of her hand. Damn it all, Bobby muttered with genuine feeling. In his opinion, Frankie had behaved outrageously. Maybe he hadn't phrased things very tactfully, but for heaven's sake, what he'd said was essentially true. Perhaps, though, he should have just kept it to himself. The next 3 days dragged on endlessly. The vicar was nursing a sore throat that reduced his speech to a pained whisper whenever he attempted to talk, which wasn't often. He spoke very little and was clearly enduring his 4th son's presence with what could only be described as saintly patience. Once or twice he even quoted Shakespeare about the ingratitude of children, comparing it to a serpent's tooth. By Saturday, Bobby felt he could no longer stand the strained atmosphere at home. He convinced Mrs. Roberts, who managed the vicarage along with her husband, to prepare him a packet of sandwiches. Supplementing this with a bottle of beer he bought in the village of Marchbolt, he set off for a solitary picnic. He had missed Frankie terribly over the past few days. These older generations were really something else. They just couldn't let things go. Bobby stretched out on a bank of soft bracken and debated whether to eat his lunch first and then take a nap, or reverse the order. While he was pondering this critical decision, the matter was settled for him when he drifted off to sleep without even realizing it. He woke up to find it was already 3:30. Bobby grinned to himself, thinking how his father would disapprove of such an idle way to spend an afternoon. According to the older man, a healthy young fellow should take a good brisk walk across the countryside, 12 miles or so, which would inevitably lead to that famous pronouncement. And now, I think, I've earned my lunch. What nonsense, Bobby thought. Why should you have to earn lunch by trudging miles you don't even want to walk? Where's the virtue in that? If you enjoy the hike, it's pure self-indulgence, and if you don't enjoy it, you're just a fool for doing it. With that settled, he fell upon his unearned lunch and ate it with great relish. With a sigh of contentment, he unscrewed the cap from his bottle of beer. It was unusually bitter, but decidedly refreshing. He lay back again, having tossed the empty bottle into a nearby clump of heather. Lying there, he felt almost godlike. The world was literally at his feet, a cliché perhaps, but a good one. He could do anything, absolutely anything, if he only put his mind to it. Grand and daring plans flashed through his imagination. Then a drowsy feeling crept over him again. A heavy, numbing lethargy stole in. He slept, a deep, profound sleep. Driving her large green Bentley, Frankie pulled up to the curb outside a sizable, old-fashioned house. Over the doorway, the words St. Asaph's were inscribed. Frankie hopped out and turned to retrieve a large bouquet of lilies from the seat. She rang the bell. A woman dressed in a nurse's uniform answered the door. "May I see Mr. Jones?" Frankie inquired. The nurse's eyes took in the Bentley, the lilies, and Frankie herself with keen interest. "What name shall I give?" "Lady Frances Derwent." The nurse was visibly thrilled, and her estimation of the patient immediately rose. She escorted Frankie upstairs to a room on the first floor. "You have a visitor to see you, Mr. Jones. Now, who do you suppose it is?" Such a lovely surprise for you. All of this was delivered in the artificially cheerful tone common to nursing homes. Good heavens! Bobby exclaimed, his face lighting up with genuine astonishment. Frankie, is that really you? Hello, Bobby, Frankie replied, holding up a bouquet. I brought the customary flowers. They have a rather morbid cemetery vibe, but the selection at the shop was pitiful. Oh, Lady Francis, the nurse interjected. They're absolutely beautiful. I'll get these into some water right away. She hurried from the room. Frankie settled into a stiff, clearly designated visitor's chair. So, Bobby, she began, what's the story here? You can well ask, Bobby said, puffing up with pride. I'm the talk of the entire hospital. 8 grains of morphine, no less. They're planning to write me up in the Lancet and the BMJ. What's the BMJ? Frankie cut in. The British Medical Journal. Fine, fine. Carry on with your alphabet soup. Do you have any idea, my dear, that half a grain is considered a lethal dose? By all rights, I should be dead 16 times over. Granted, there's a recorded recovery after 16 grains, but 8 is still quite impressive. Don't you think? I'm the local celebrity. They've never seen a case like mine. How lovely for them. Isn't it? It gives the staff something fresh to chatter about with all the other patients. The nurse returned, carefully arranging the lilies in their vases. It's true, isn't it, nurse? Bobby pressed. You've never had a patient like me before. Oh, you really shouldn't be here at all, the nurse said with a playful shake of her head. You ought to be in the churchyard by rights. But they do say only the good die young. She giggled at her own joke and slipped back out. You see? Bobby said triumphantly. Mark my words, I'll be famous across the whole country. He launched into a detailed narrative. Any hint of the insecurity he'd shown during their last meeting completely vanished, replaced by a firm, almost boastful delight in recounting every medical particular. Enough, Frankie said, cutting him off. I'm not terribly fascinated by the intricacies of stomach pumps. Listening to you, one would think nobody had ever been poisoned before. Very few have been poisoned with 8 grains of morphine and lived to tell the tale, Bobby pointed out, a little deflated. Honestly, you're not nearly impressed enough. Must have been terribly disappointing for whoever tried to poison you, Frankie remarked dryly. I know. A complete waste of perfectly good morphine. It was in the beer, correct? Yes. Apparently someone found me dead to the world, tried to rouse me, and couldn't. They panicked, hauled me to a nearby farmhouse and sent for a doctor. I'm familiar with the next chapter, Frankie said hastily. Initially, they thought I'd taken the stuff on purpose. Then, after hearing my account, they went and found the bottle where I'd tossed it and had it analyzed. The dregs were apparently quite sufficient for that. Any leads on how the morphine got into the bottle? None whatsoever. They questioned the pub where I bought it, opened other bottles from the same batch, and everything was perfectly normal. So someone must have slipped it into your beer while you were asleep. That's the theory. I do recall the paper seal across the top wasn't sticking properly anymore. Frankie nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. Well, she said finally, this proves what I said that day was absolutely correct. What did you say? That the man Pritchard was pushed over the cliff. You said that at the station, not on the train, Bobby corrected weakly. Same difference. But why? Darling, it's obvious. Why would anyone want to eliminate you? You're not some secret heir to a fortune. I might be, Bobby protested with mock seriousness. Some distant great-aunt I've never met, in New Zealand or somewhere, could have left me everything. Don't be absurd. Not without knowing you. And if she didn't know you, why leave money to a 4th son? Honestly, in these difficult economic times, even a clergyman might think twice about having a 4th son. No, it's perfectly clear. No one gains from your death, so we can rule that out. That leaves revenge. You haven't, by any chance, seduced a pharmacist's daughter. Not that I can recall, Bobby said with affected dignity. I know one seduces so frequently it's hard to keep track. But offhand, I'd say you've never seduced anyone at all. You're making me blush, Frankie. And why must it be a pharmacist's daughter anyway? Easy access to morphine, of course. Getting your hands on morphine isn't exactly a simple task. Well, I haven't been courting a pharmacist's daughter. And you're certain you don't have any known enemies? Bobby shook his head. There you have it, Frankie declared with a note of triumph. It has to be connected to the man who went over the cliff. What's the official police theory? They're leaning toward it being the work of a madman. That's absurd. Madmen don't roam the countryside with endless supplies of morphine. looking for random bottles of beer to contaminate. No, someone pushed that Pritchard fellow over the edge. You happened along moments later, and he assumed you witnessed the whole thing, deciding to eliminate